We're ready.
This is a typical school lunch in France.
This is a lunch in Brazil.
In Spain.
In South Korea.
In Greece.
And in the USA.
The discrepancy between the nutritional values of the school lunches in America compared to lunches in Greece and the other countries previously mentioned is prodigious. On the left-hand side, we can see that the lunch is filled with vegetables, lean meats, grains, yogurt, fruit, among other healthy foods, whereas in America, the lunches served are highly processed and include an incredible amount of sugar.
Obesity is now a classified epidemic. However, it is a preventable epidemic. In what President Obama called the most urgent health issue of our time, American children are obviously the biggest victims.
Our group has decided to research the effect that major food corporations have on childhood obesity in the United States, and we have found that the food industry hires corporate scientists to re-engineer food products to include double the amount of sugar than in the past, and thus making these sugary products highly addictive.
Corporations are allowed to do this because they lobby the government to oppose effective reforms in school and in the government.
Because of this lack of policy, companies are able to advertise directly and exploitably to children.
This is an equation that former corporate scientist for Frito-Lay, Robert Isan Lim, revealed in a public interview. The amount of sugar it takes to make a child addicted is what corporation-hired scientists call the bliss point. Making children addicted to these sugary products is a calculation. A study by Professor Bart Hobel and his team in the Department of Psychology and the Princeton Neuroscience Institute proved that rats can become dependent on sugar under certain circumstances and thus make them more susceptible to metabolic diseases, which we believe translates into human conditions such as obesity. This experiment included several rats that were placed in a cage with sugar and cocaine. 94% of these tested rats preferred sugar, and of the rats who preferred sugar, many displayed symptoms of addiction, including withdrawal, binging, craving, and cross-sensitization.
In fact, this study found that sugar is 8 times more addictive than cocaine.
Overloading ourselves with sugar creates a rapid domino effect of chemical changes in the body, leaving us craving for even more sugar as a result. The World Health Organization recommends about 12 grams of sugar on a daily basis for the average American, and the American Heart Association recommends even less. However, because of the added sugar in products, Americans are far exceeding this recommended intake.
This is because in 1977, a report was put out by the United States Senate Select Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs in an attempt to slow down the growing problem of obesity in America. The report urged food companies to cut down on fat from their products, and they agreed. However, in order to make up for this bland taste that was caused by the lack of fat, they doubled the sugar in virtually all of their products.
And in fact, 80% of the 600,000 items in a typical grocery store in the United States will have contained added sugar.
Because of this, the average child exceeds the recommended amount of sugar within their first meal.
This enormous amount of sugar intake corresponds to a vast range of metabolic diseases, including type 2 diabetes mellitus, which is a disease that was only prevalent in ages 60 years old and over prior to 1980. Now, more than 186,000 children in the United States have type 2 diabetes, according to the CDC. 20 years ago, 1 in 20 children in the U.S. were classified as obese. But today, this statistic has elevated to 1 in 5.
So if this excessive amount of sugar in everyday food products is causing so many problems and is costing American taxpayers $500 billion in healthcare expenses, why isn't the government trying to do more to intervene? The simple answer is that corporate influence has affected public policy to rework laws to its advantage, often at the detriment of public health care. For example, in 2009, a discussion regarding a possible federal tax on sugar-sweetened beverages arose. The White House Obesity Task Force merely suggested that an increase in the price of soft drinks could discourage children and teenagers from the excessive consumption of the empty calories found in soda. In the same year, there was a dramatic increase in lobbying expenses by soda interests such as Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and the American Beverage Association, as you can see here. The huge spike in spending by the three actors added up to more than $37 million, and despite enthusiastic public support for the suggested soda tax, the soda interests and their paid lobbyists were successful in preventing the introduction of such a policy. The federal government has also attempted to create better guidelines for school lunches, to little avail due to industry lobbying. In November 2011, the United States Department of Agriculture updated their school lunch guidelines. They amended the regulation that had counted tomato paste on pizza and French fries as a vegetable. Under previous regulations, cafeterias were required to serve one vegetable per day, and companies were able to sell pizza slices and French fries to fulfill this requirement. The revision of this rule caught the attention of big food companies, and they spent a combined $5.6 million on lobbying expenses to fight stricter school lunch regulations. Swayed by this monetary influence, lawmakers were able to amend the lunch guidelines to keep frozen pizza and French fries on the school menu.
Just as French fries have stayed in the American school lunch system, Coca-Cola has maintained 80% of its contracts with public schools selling directly to children, despite in May 2013 promising to stop selling towards children. Kids see about 10,000 ads per year. They don't even see them only on the TV, they see them everywhere they look. Companies have found loyalty in the naive trust of children. And what they found was that an 8-year-old cannot understand the persuasive nature of advertisements, and a kid under the age of 6 cannot even tell the difference between a show and an advertisement. But by the age of 2, a child can recognize and begin a liking for and ask for specific brands. Companies use celebrities, famous characters, and their own brand advocates to put a friendly face on a product. They make kids associate the liking they have for the product to the liking they have for the character. Sugary cereals have been the biggest fan of this tactic. A study done by Cornell University found that the eyes of the cereal characters have a depression angle of 9.6 degrees, looking directly into the eyes of an averagely heighted child. This direct eye contact increased trust by 16% and connection to the brand by 28%. Kids by the age of 2 are starting to reach a crucial point where they're making decisions about their eating habits, and these advertisements are encouraging poor eating habits, usually leading to obesity.
Our group has come up with 3 tangible solutions for this problem. The first is to place a tax on soda. The second is to educate our children about nutrition and health through lunch programs. And the third is to use character branding to promote healthier foods.
Our first solution is to place a tax on soda, kind of like how cigarettes are taxed. If and when the government decides to implement this policy, dramatic changes are likely to be seen in the long run. Matthew Harding, an economist at Duke University, analyzed over 100 million supermarket purchases and found that when there was a 20% increase in the price of soda, consumers spent nearly 4% less on the drink a month, decreasing their household caloric intake by almost 5,000 calories.
Our second solution pertains to education. In countries such as France and Japan, it is evident that governments put public health over corporate profit because they subsidize school lunch programs rather than oppose them. In Japan specifically, there's a heavy emphasis on what we call shokuiku, which is the general education of health and well-being. With a budget, public schools are even able to hire nutritionists to educate the children once a week about how to lead a healthier life. The result is something like this. These children serve food for their peers and themselves while learning about how these foods are healthy for their bodies.
Another solution is to take all advertisements out of schools. It's not possible to ask them to stop advertising altogether, seeing as they still need to make a profit, but let's let schools be a safe place for children. To add to that solution, we can also use the tactics that the food industry uses, such as character branding, to advocate healthier foods, like SpongeBob advertising edamame and Subway's Get Your Veggie On advertisement going on behind me.
Like with any other industry, the primary goals of the food industry are to expand market shares and to generate profit. Companies have the responsibility to their shareholders to increase revenue and are under pressure to sell as much as possible. In a capitalist market economy, it is crucial that corporations can pursue these goals. However, public health must always be prioritized, and checks and balances are needed to align the financial interests of the food companies with the goals of public health.
If and when our recommended solutions are implemented, we can ensure that we would be taking the first steps needed in order to provide a healthier future for the American children.
So I'm just going to take this opportunity to ask each of you a question. So I'm going to ask the question. Please feel free to think about it and process it before you answer. And if you need me to repeat it, then just say, please repeat again. Okay? And all these questions are meant to aid your presentation and to share something you didn't share today. So we'll start with Angie. You guys had a lot of research in your team paper. What did you choose to leave out today, and why did you decide to leave that out?
Does it have to be like our part of our research or our solutions?
It could be on anything that you guys wrote in your team paper.
We cut out a lot of stuff, but our one of our solutions was to modify the nutrition fact panels, and actually the FDA had approved a new panel that should be implemented by 2017, but there were some aspects of the nutrition facts that we thought could be further improved, and we decided to leave that out it was sort of a time issue.
Okay, great, thank you. Olivia, if you were to continue your research, what topic do you think you would look at next? Where does all this leave you as a team or individually?
Individually, when I was researching, I had such sympathy for all these kids that had to deal with this disease and grow up at the same time. I would love to research the mental disabilities that come along with obesity. What I found is that it comes with depression and social exclusion, and that these kids just have a really hard time.
Great, thank you. And Maya, looking at your bibliography here, what source or sources for you, individually or as a group, were most reliable and why?
A source that we all used and relied pretty heavily on is the critically acclaimed documentary Fed Up, and we thought that documentary was very useful because it featured prominent politicians, dietitians, health experts who were well informed and well versed in this obesity epidemic, and that kind of allowed us to watch it, and if like say a doctor was featured that we found was very interesting, we could like go to the library and look for extra works by him.
Great, thank you.